I'm Jane Fraser and I'm an outreach worker for Dudley Museum Service. There are many paintings of Dudley in our collection, notably of the castle and surrounding area, but fewer of the actual town centre. The artists who choose the town as a subject often use the two churches, top and bottom, as significant markers, with the market and its fountain also being subjects of interest, and more recently the statue of Duncan Edwards and other public sculpture. The castle often, of course, provides an imposing background. These two paintings depict Dudley at night time. The first is in oils, a view of Castle Hill looking towards St Edmund's Church. Indeed, the church is the only building that can be seen fairly distinctly, its grey shape providing focus and perspective, because the style is intensely impressionistic. The artist is less interested in actualities and more concerned with the play of light and colour. To balance the impressionist style, the composition is perfectly arranged. The colour, interest in activity in the fore and centre ground, the trees, figures and street lights giving symmetry, and the grey distant church offsetting the dramatic sky. This twilight gives the artist plenty of scope to depict the warm and intense shades being gradually subsumed by the encroaching cloud. The sky is a rich mix of yellows, oranges, red and white, reflected in what looks like the rain-soaked road, possibly with tram lines, with muddy browns and greens added to the mix. Horse-drawn trams began operating in Dudley in 1883, followed by steam-powered ones a year later. Buildings, trees and figures are suggested rather than carefully delineated. The figures and the impression of vehicles suggests activity, perhaps the hustle and bustle at the end of a working day. Everywhere, the viewer finds warmth and interest in this intensely atmospheric urban image. The second painting is of the High Street and Market Square, with this time the Church of St Thomas tall in the background and the imposing fountain on the right. Again, the scene is of a busy winter twilight, and again, the composition is intensely satisfying to the viewer. But this time, instead of a rectangular view, we have a curving sweep, really bringing us into the street and making us part of the crowds doing their shopping. The buildings, which begin to the right, curve up the high street to the focal point of the church, and in fact take up more than a quarter of the painting. But they don't dominate. The rich browns, yellows and reds turn to blues and greys as the eye is led around the curve and to the perfect visual marker of the church. Other satisfying vertical markers are provided by the fountain to the right and the lamp in the left foreground. Note the atmosphere of cold and rain created in a few brushstrokes, the red muffler of one of the figures and the approaching person in black, hat on and head down against the weather. Many shades of cool blues, greys and browns are used to the right, and the blue of the tram lines is a perfect suggestion of rain. Nevertheless, the warmth of the yellow lamplight and its reflections, the man-made light, and the orange of the sunset, less dominant than in the previous painting, offer a feeling of comfort to this twilight scene. So, who was the artist? He is Ernest R Fox, born around 1861-1862 in Dorchester, Dorset. Little is known of his life, even his given birth and death dates vary, but in the 1891 census he was recorded as living in Marazion in Cornwall and had exhibited two paintings in Dowdeswell the previous year. These were St Michael's Mount, Hazy Weather, and A Cornish Lane. From here he moved to the southeast coast, living in Dover, Canterbury, Rochester and Hythe in Kent. He must have been an artist of some repute, since he was made a member of the New English Art Club in 1888 and exhibited at the Royal Academy of Art in 1894, as well as many other galleries, including the Glasgow Institute of Fine Arts and Manchester Art Gallery. He painted dreamy landscapes of rural and urban scenes in an impressionist style, together with the occasional portrait. Some of his work is held by museums in Rochester in Kent. He was an associate of J.M. Whistler, who, as well as his famous portraits, also painted many nocturnes, night scenes, in an increasingly abstract way. When I first came across Fox's paintings, I was reminded of J. Atkinson Grimshaw, the Leeds artist, who also knew Whistler when he took a studio in Chelsea. Grimshaw's paintings have sometimes been criticised as overly romantic, but he was an acknowledged master of nighttime scenes in industrial and urban settings. His style, however, is noticeably more literal and detailed than that of Fox. What all painters of nighttime have in common, though, is the fascination with light and colour, and the effect of illumination, both natural and artificial, on a particular scene. In the case of J.M.W. Turner, his obsession with light made his paintings more and more abstract, and in this he was way ahead of his time. In the 19th century, the public liked their art to have at least a hint of the literal, even if rendered in an impressionist way. But back to Ernest Fox. What is his connection with Dudley? Well, we know that he came to Dudley because in 2013, BBC News reported that a sketchbook with his name on was discovered in a charity shop in Deal, and this was passed on to Dudley museums. Apparently, Fox had lived in Tower House in the town, and whilst there he must have sketched and painted what he saw around him, as well as going on excursions to the surrounding countryside. The sketches are dated between 1880 and 1884, and several of them show a recognisable Dudley skyline, where he experiments with the colours of sunset and night. I wonder if he was inspired by Turner, who had undertaken a similar trip many years before. Take a look at these images from the sketchbook now and see if you recognise any familiar landmarks. And when they're able to be displayed again, please enjoy the beautiful and evocative nocturnes of Dudley's town centre. I'm Jane Fraser, and I'm an outreach worker for Dudley Museum Service. There are many paintings